Borag Fung Earthlets. This is Steve back again with a deep dive into the depths of 2000 AD. Each of these episodes comes out once a month on the second Saturday. Welcome to June. And this time around, we're going to be talking about a comic which had a very short life and then a very long afterlife in the form of Fiends of the Eastern Front. This was a comic which started out in the Prague in 1980, only a few years into its existence, and ran from Prague 152 to Prague 161, with 10 parts in total, completing the story. By Jerry Finley Day and Carlos Esquerra. This is probably one of the most well-regarded horror stories in 2080's existence, and thankfully, I've got someone who's a keen eye on these sort of things to help me walk through the trenches. Um, Matty, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
It is brilliant to have you here. Now, Matty, you are the founder, the producer of Stoked, a brilliant YouTube channel which goes into long, deep dives themselves into different parts of pop culture, in particular British culture. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about the podcast before we go anywhere else?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. That's a great intro. Thank you very much. Stoked have been doing it for a little over 10 years, actually. I've been doing this for a long time. It's just been a long time hobby of mine. I started it with a housemate. And then when he moved out, I kind of struck out on my own. And the entire point of it has always been to look at like perhaps slightly forgotten media. So I like to talk about things like films and games that maybe fell between the cracks or maybe just didn't really register that high, and look at them again with a bit of a, like a shine a new light on them and kind of reappreciate them and reevaluate them. And as part of that, I love comics, and I specifically love European and British comics. And that just feels, again, to me, it just felt like such an underrepresented part of YouTube. I really wanted to watch videos about British comics and about Judge Dredd and about 2000 AD. And there are some out there, but there weren't really enough. There weren't many. So I thought, you know what, I can take that task on and I'll go and make a few and add that into the pool and get the conversation going. So that's very much where I'm at. And they're being extremely well received. I'm getting great amount of, really great views, really great comments. It's really cool because a lot of people out there are hungry for this stuff. They want to see more stuff about British comics. And yeah, it's really nice to be a part of that community.
And then when you go to your channel, which is Matty Stoked, all one word, we'll spell it out in the show notes. You can find videos on characters like the leopard from Lime Street, and these are not just he's a leopard. He got bitten by a leopard and he's powerful and stuff. This is probably going into detail on the character's origins, why he was created, what the idea was. Arguably just to bounce off American superhero comics and gently appropriate them all. But you go really into the making of them and why they were important at the time, why readers liked them, and showing people just why there's a legacy there, why there's something memorable about these characters. Which is what
Yeah.
we're trying to do the deep dive as well. But you doing so much more. Let's say just more with more style.
That's
Perhaps.
very kind. It's very kind. And that's exactly what I like to do. It's not, for me, appreciating any kind of art or any kind of, creative product. I don't think it's enough just to look at the thing and go, here it is and here's how it works. For me, the interest is, how did it come around? How did it come about? What were the artists inspired by? What was happening in the world at the time that would have led to this being created? And that's the great thing, is art doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's always something that led to it. And if you break down that barrier and look around at history, look around at the creators themselves, you often find these really great little stories. And we were just chatting about it before the podcast. You get people like a Pat Mills, who is kind of sat in a country, in a socio-economic situation, and is very, very annoyed, and then just uses that as impetus to tell stories. and then that's reflected in every one of their stories. And it's great to peel back those layers and go, it's not just cool that Nemesis the Warlock is a weird looking horse wizard. We can also find out, well, where did he come from and what's it saying?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the key thing about 2000 AD, I think, in particular, is a lot of the stories you will read them the first time, maybe when you're younger, and you go, "Oh, Judge Dredd's really cool. He's no nonsense." And Strontium Dog, he's got these time bombs, and all the characters are, the designs are great, the character names are great, the settings, the environments, it's all really fun. If you go back and read them a second time, you start to go, "Oh, Strontium Dog's really saying a lot of things about division of power in Britain," or Judge Dredd's talking about authoritarianism. Nemesis the Warlock is talking about basically whatever Pat Mills wants to talk about this week. But
Yeah.
he's a very complex writer. It's very hard to boil Nemesis down to one particular thing. But there's a lot in there that you can work with, and that's even true for the comic that we're going to talk about today. Fiends of the Eastern Front. Now, I've got this, and I always have these to hand. I'm getting them in the Hachette editions,
Oh,
which are the
nice.
ones with a nice little spine on the side. If you are not listening, if you're just listening to this, you're not watching, you won't see me flashing the cover by Carlos Esquera. But the book is also available in paperback from 2018. Oh, and you've got one there. I
There you
love
go.
it.
I've got it here. Yeah.
Fantastic. There are 2 volumes of it, but the story we're going to talk about today is just the original run, which is in the first collection only. Now, Matt, do you want to talk about what is Fiends of the Eastern Front first and foremost?
Sure. Well, see, like any comic of its ilk, it's usually very simple to describe, and then there are layers below it. So ostensibly, Fiends of the Eastern Front is a vampire war story. Tells a story about it is the real story. It's set against the real Operation Barbarossa, which was the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, but it adds vampires into the mix. And then that's your high concept. It's
Yeah.
maybe you could say it's like Kelly's Heroes with vampires or something. That kind of feels
That's
about
a
right.
great way of describing it. Yeah.
But we'll get into kind of the bigger part, because also the big kind of thing here is it is a story about the Nazis. It's a story about World War II, and so that having that tension in the story is really, really key.
Because unlike other comics of the era or ever, this is a story set with a Nazi protagonist. Hans Schmitt is
Hans
our
Schmidt.
lead, Smitty. And when the other Germans talk to him in their dialogue, they call him Smith. They
Yes,
don't
they
call him
do.
Schmidt,
Yeah.
which I love. As a great little touch. But yeah, it's set from the other side, so to speak. And Hans, as the series starts off, is in a convoy, essentially going across
Yeah.
the very cold climates towards the top of the hemisphere,
Well,
and he's accompanied by a very strange set of passengers, I suppose, in one of the trucks just down the way from him.
yeah, that's so the framing, I think, of the entire story is really, really smart. I think the intention for Fiends was that it would be a one and done. I don't think there was an intention that it would create a series that would then run on, because the whole thing opens up and it's 1980, and a bunker has just been discovered under Berlin, which probably happened quite a lot throughout,
Mm.
in the decades after the fall of Berlin. They're probably finding all these bunkers all the time. So they find a secret bunker. They go down there. There's a skeleton in a Nazi uniform,
Hmm.
and it's got these weird daubings on the wall, and he's got his final memoirs, the final memoirs of Hans Schmidt. And then it does the time travel, like the Wayne's World,
Yeah. Yes.
and we go back to 1941, I want to say.
41. Yeah.
And then that tells the story of how I came to be here in this bunker underneath Berlin. And I think that's just such a great sort of filmic framing technique, because obviously that will then plays at the end of the story as well. Those, you never see that again, but that's the framing thing of we're reading this diary of this unbelievable story that this guy went through.
Hmm.
But yeah, so Hans Schmidt, who I think straight away we see he's a real little kind of ladder climber. He's a real overachiever. His superior officer says, "Who would like to go to a suicide mission to the Russian front lines?" And he's
Didn't know we
straight
were
away,
doing
he's like,
voices. I love it. I didn't
"Well,
know
we
we were
have,
doing
come on,
voices.
it's okay because they're the Nazis, and so we're allowed to ridicule them, and nobody can be offended." But Schmidt then says, he puts his hand up and he goes, "Me, send me to the front line. I want to go." And there's a little thought bubble, and he's sort of thinking to himself, I can't wait to get a medal. I can't wait to go
Yeah.
and commit some atrocities to get a medal and be a war hero.
Hmm.
He cannot wait. And then the funny thing is, it's almost straight away he ruins it. He like trips over, gets caught in barbed wire, and
Yeah.
then he's been sent to the Eastern Front, so he's in Russia, and the Russians see him trapped in this barbed wire. They come over with the rifles and they're ready to kill him, and he's like lying in the barbed wire, and he's like, "No, I can't believe, poor
My
me,
first
poor."
chance, and I've ruined it.
Yeah, poor innocent Hans Schmidt. This is it for me. And then he's saved by these like ethereal, mystical shapes that come out of the darkness, and they coalesce into these sort of horrific forms, and they just tear the Russians into bits. And then he's in the barbed wire, going, "What the hell is this? What are these monsters?" And then they come towards him. He's terrified. I can't believe it. This is it. I thought I was going to die. Then I was saved. Now I think I'm going to die again. And then they finally form into actual sort of human-looking characters wearing military uniforms. And this is where we meet Captain Constanta. And he says, "Oh no, don't worry about us. We're just normal Romanians. Don't be alarmed. We are perfectly normal Romanians." And they said, "You've got nothing to fear from us, because we only fight the enemies of Romania," which for now means Russia. That's kind of like that. I think that's like the first
That's the
story.
first part.
That's
Yeah.
the ending, and it's like, wow, okay, this is very, very cool. I think straight away, Constanta, the way that Esquerra draws him, you'll never convince me this isn't Vincent Price. You'll never convince me that was not the intention here.
I can absolutely see
Uh,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and I think again, it's just beautiful, like the angular face, the kind of long bone structure. It's just, and it would be perfect casting for 1980 as well.
He's
That would
so
have absolutely ruled.
uniquely unhuman in some way. Like there's, you look at the character, and he's in the uniform. He's got everything you expect from a human, but the bone structure, the body language, there's something just slightly wrong about the whole thing. It's not quite angled in the right way.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
obviously we kind of know exactly what's going to happen right from the start. But
But yeah,
for Schmidt,
that's the
you
great
see
thing.
him. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of these great stories where we're always about 10 steps ahead of Schmidt. Like, we see this coming from day one, and it takes Schmidt absolutely ages to figure it out. But what's
Years.
great about
Yeah.
we're then treated to, page after page, because week after week we're seeing Schmidt go to war with with Constanta and his Romanians, and he's watching them absolutely brutalize these Russian soldiers,
Mm.
tearing them apart, like absolutely fighting like demons. They're absolutely tearing them into shreds. And we see them, turning into wolves to chase down ski troopers. We see them turning into smoke and like pouring through the cracks of a tank, and then, attacking the
Yeah.
crew on the inside. Absolutely fantastic stuff. Clearly Esquerra's having a whale of a time. He's loving
Swarms of
this.
bats. Every other issue, there's like a bat attack of some kind as well, and
Yeah.
Esquire makes the whole scene, because it's obviously they're only attacking at night, and he makes it so claustrophobic and unreal, and then these little creatures start swooping in, and well, here we go, here's the bat scene.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
brilliant. It just really plays into the idea of what's going to happen, but seeing the way he depicts it is the fun of it a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's so good. And yeah, we get to enjoy the fact that Schmidt is so stupid he can't figure this out. So like you said, they only ever attack at night. During the day, he goes, "Oh, I never see them during the day. That's peculiar, isn't it?" But there's this lorry with their logo on the side of it. This must be some sort of supply truck. And he has a look one time underneath the top, and it's just a load of coffins. And he still doesn't get it. He's like, "Oh, peculiar that they carry coffins around with them." And like
He
it
checks
just
the lorry driver, and the lorry driver's like, "Oh yes, this van, it is filled with my masters, and don't question it. Bye."
yeah. Yeah.
He's off.
And the next day they've got like the doctor, and like he's finding the bodies, and they're all like drained of blood. They're covered in bite marks. Like we are given so many clues as to what's going on, and Schmidt just won't join us in that.
Yeah.
And it's just so good. I think that's just, he's like his whole thing is, there's something up with these Romanians. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I tell you what, I'm glad they're on our side.
Mm,
That's his big. He says that a lot. He's
a
like, I'm just
lot.
glad they're fighting on our side. And there's some foreshadowing here, because
Uh,
that's the. Did
and
you want to take this?
I could say, what this reminds me of, in a strange, convoluted way, is it reminds me of the film of the summer so far, Final Destination.
Oh yeah,
because you know exactly what's going to happen and you know
Yes.
how it's going to happen. But you don't know when it's going to happen or why it's going to happen. So you're watching the scene going, okay, Schmidt has repeatedly told us that they are on his side and they are strange and he doesn't quite know what's going on. And no one else in the war seems to have any interest in them. They're just, oh, they're a secret weapon that we've got. You know, these Romanians, they sleep in the day. That's what Romanians are like, I guess. They wake up in the night and they go to fight, and that's great. It really helps the war effort, and that's all the rest of the comrades really care about. Schmidt's the only one who's noticing something's going on, and then at the start of the middle story, that is when things change.
Yeah. Yeah. We get that great. I think it's the Schmidt finally twigs. He finally figures out that they're vampires, and he sees them going to kill a Russian. Like he's lying on his back, and he's like, "Please, please, no!" And they're stalking their prey. And he finally has enough. He goes, "I finally figured out," and he forms like a cross to ward them away.
Hmm.
And Constanta says something like, "Oh, you may have figured out our secret, but you're safe for now because you're our ally." And then the next issue is they get the airdrop, the propaganda drop from the plane. It now says Romania have joined the Soviet Union. They are now the enemies of Germany. So then we have that. The whole comic then shifts completely on its head and becomes a completely different story.
And the great thing is that Schmidt finds them at the same time as the familiar, the Renfield character, essentially. So it becomes immediately as a race against time to get back to military command and tell them those coffins, that's we need to do something about this. We have to get there in time. And Schmidt loses, as you said at the start. He's not an accomplished soldier. He's not a great fighter. He's not the smartest. And so, when he gets put up against a Renfield, I think, chops him in the throat so he can't
Yeah,
speak,
so we can't
and
speak.
then
Yeah,
runs off and gets there and beats everyone else. Tells the rest of the vampires, by the way, we've changed sides now. We need to start eating Nazis. And there you go. The whole thing has shifted in one, one story. That's
yeah,
2000's greatness. It's a structure. Um, and I think for me, just I would say, I think this is the key part of the entire story. The selling it, the hook is, it's vampires versus Nazis. That's exciting. It's a fun thing to watch, but it's the fact that it's all based around political lines. It's all based around he's on our side now because we've drawn these lines in the war. And the fact that it just switches halfway through because of the real world, that happened with the Romanians in 1944, they did switch to side against the Nazis. So having that is a really clever twist mid-story, I think. Um,
yeah, yeah.
what,
I
yeah,
completely agree with that. I think that switch is super because the comic then completely changes, and it becomes a survival story. It's like because Schmidt, like you said, Schmidt's running back to his unit because he needs to warn them that they're vampires. And I think when he finally gets there, half of his unit are like, "Oh, don't be, you're being paranoid. Don't worry about it." And
yeah.
then the other half, I think, are already dead. Like, but he gets there too late. They've already been slaughtered.
Hmm.
So it ends up being just him and his mate Carl against Constanta's lot, and
Yeah.
it then becomes a survival story. And it reminded me a little bit of like a story like Predator or maybe Aliens, where you've
Mm,
got like a small unit of people against a threat that is just far and away more advanced in some way than they are.
yeah.
How do you kill vampires? We've established the fact that bullets don't kill them. We've seen them be shot a ton actually in previous issues. Like Finley Day and Ascara have done a good job of letting us know these guys are very difficult to kill, and now they're coming after the main characters, and that's such a great shift. And they have to use everything they've learned. They set traps and they set like ambushes, and they have to, they're trying everything they can with the limited resources they have, and they actually managed to whittle a few of them down. They actually managed to successfully fight back and
Yeah.
kill a couple of Constanta's vampires.
I think one of my favorite parts of the story is when Schmidt has run back to the group and they're getting the humans are getting taken out by the vampires just before they turn tables a little bit. And Schmidt is going, right, here, you take some crosses, take some garlic, take some silver. Can we purify some water? Like, just trying to think of everything he can think of in his head of like, this is how you stop a vampire. This is how you save the day. And most of them, like you say, don't listen and get eaten as a result. And then it's just him and his friend in a little circle of garlic, I think,
Yeah, garlic.
with
Yeah.
all the vampires just circling around him. And this is where Esquire is like the ideal artist for it, because they looked unreal and uncanny before, but now he makes them into monsters, and
Oh
it's
man,
it's so
there
vivid.
there are a couple of panels in this. Esquerra was born for this book. I think this is such a good book for him because the kind of grimy, gritty quality of war comics in general, but also this once you add supernatural elements to it, it's his pen work, the texture, the mark making, it just absolutely sings.
Mm.
It is perfect for this kind of story. And there is near the end, there is a panel of Constanta's face. I'm going to hold it up to the thing, but you can find the screenshot, I guess, and put it on the. But it's this panel here, and it's this picture of Constanta's
Oh
face
yes,
where
yeah.
it's almost completely black. Like there's so much hatching and shading, but he's just got these piercing white eyes that are shining out of the page, and then the fangs are lit up, and it's just that's like a chilling. That gave me goosebumps. That's such a good image.
No humanity in there at all. And this
Yeah,
is just as all the other vampires have, like they're shifting into the darkness, they're turning into shadows as well, just like we saw right at the start of the story. And now it's starting to connect all the dots again. We're going, oh yes, this is a flashback. We're going back, and we've got to still go back in forward in time to whatever's going to happen next,
yeah,
whatever that
yeah,
may be. And then Square as well, as you say, he's a really gritty, grimy artist, and so the fight back to escape these otherworldly creatures, it's not just, let's just, crossbow them or decapitate them, whatever. It is every fight is a hard earned fight. There are bodies in the way, there is smoke getting in your eyes, the guns are, you have to aim them properly. I think there's one scene where he has to aim a gun on top of one of his dead comrades
yes,
to get their to get the target in. Like, it is not easy, and we know that Schmidt's not a great fighter. He's an everyman. And we spent half our time now following him for about 5 or 6 progs, the sympathetic Nazi, you
yeah,
could argue, and now he's got to go on the assault. And it's interesting because by this point I was totally on his side, even though really, Constanta is politically now on the right, you know, on the
yeah.
left.
And
I don't know.
yeah, well, that yeah, yeah. I think this is actually something that I mentioned to you previously before we sort of started on the podcast. When I'd said to you, the thing that struck out to me when I read this story for the first time was after the maybe second issue of it, it kind of hit me. I was like, wait a minute, I'm reading a story where the main character is a Nazi, and not being shown to be a good Nazi, not being like, oh no, I'm one of the ones who disobeyed orders. No, he's obeying orders. He's doing what he's told.
He's
He
diligent,
is,
yeah.
yeah, he is very sort of happy and proud to be a member of the Third Reich. So I was like, this is a really difficult story to read and then go, he's a good guy. This is our protagonist. He's the main guy, and the fact that it's set against Operation Barbarossa, which again is a very real thing that happened. And not to be too bleak, but like I think it's important to kind of recognize the history here. The invasion of the Soviet Union was ostensibly Germany's plan to wipe out all of the communists and all of the Slavs from the Soviet Union and replace them with Germans. It's an ethnic cleansing exercise,
Mm.
um, to take all the land, all the materials, all the wealth, and replace all of it with German people. And they used every tool they used in every other part of the Holocaust: deportation, slavery, genocide, mass shootings, gassings. They did it all. It was a horrible conflict. This isn't just a conflict over land where there's heroes on both sides. This isn't like a classical conflict. This is absolutely, the Nazis were the bad guys.
Mhm.
There's no room for moral grey areas here. And this is the character we've chosen to tell the story about. Someone who obeyed an order to go and do that. And so that's straight away, that was what was hitting me. And it's like keeping me at arm's length a little bit from this story, because I'm like, I'm not really sure when I'm seeing Schmitt and Constanta successfully carrying out essentially like their part in a genocide. I'm like, I'm not sure how I feel about this. Like, Dredd is a bad guy, but he's not an actual Nazi, you know. Vampires are bad guys, that's fine, but we can also, there's plenty of stories we can read about vampires and we can enjoy them as protagonists because we can enjoy the kind of what they represent about the human condition. But again, they're not actual Nazis, and it's like, I was like, this kind of feels like a step too far. I'm not sure
Mm.
if I can come along on this journey. And I think the word that struck me was the absolute gall of telling a story, at least for a bit, where the Nazis are the main characters. Um, and this is something that Finlay Day did a few times. This isn't something that he was unknown for. Hellman of Hammerforce is another example of a sympathetic German. Panzer G Man, he did a few. There's maybe four or five of these types of characters that he created. And I think ultimately what he's doing is asking you to kind of trust in him as a storyteller and like, come make the leap, make that leap of faith with me in this story, and trust me, it's all going to work out in the end. And it does. Like, that trust does pay off. If you stay with the story long enough, you actually realize you're being given a very complex story, but you're certainly not being given a story where Jerry Finney Day is trying to convince you that the Nazis were good guys. There's no both sides in here. The story is very well written. It just has that really complex beginning where I was like, yeah, there's a lot of push and pull, and I'm like, ooh, who should I kind of, who should I vouch for? But then once Constanta starts killing Nazis, I was like, oh, okay, this is great. I'm on board. Like this, I trusted you. You brought it back, and now I'm happy. And I don't want to give away too many spoilers because I think this is a good story that people should go and read. But as I mentioned, the opening panel of this is Hans Schmitt dead. It's his skeleton, right? So we kind of know essentially that Schmitt doesn't make it out alive. But again, that doesn't reduce the stakes. We still get a good story, but it does mean the good news is all of his unit died. So like that's okay. But yeah, so it's very, very complex. Is really that was the thing that stood out to me the most.
I think one thing that increases the complexity of it as well is that the creative team don't choose to establish Constanza at all. There's no reason, there's no flashbacks for him, there's no understanding of here's why he joined the war, here's what he wants to be in the war for. It's not a case of, oh, it's great to be a vampire in wartime because there's loads of people to eat,
Mm.
loads of blood around, no one's watching. It's just, he's just there. There's no explanation for why he's there. So, with characters like Dread, you get very clearly drilled into this is why he is who he is, this is why he's doing what he is. Constanto, you've no real idea. So we've got a general sort of everyman Nazi character as our protagonist, and we've got this otherworldly force who is doing things for no particular reason that we can tell. So when we see them two up against each other, we don't really know what's going to happen or where it's meant to lead. Is the idea we're going to get a staking at the end? Is the idea that we're going
Mm.
to get Schmidt defeated? Does Jerry Day think one side is needs to have a victory, one side's not going to have a victory? You just don't know where it's going to go. Um, and the thing about Jerry Finley Day as well, at 2000 AD in particular, is he ends his stories. He
Yeah,
has an ending, you could argue, for Rogue Trooper, as an ending for the VCs. Like, when he tells a story, he has generally a finale in place. We don't know what it's going to be, and we're not going to tell
yeah.
people on this podcast either. You have to buy the book, but you know, it just makes the whole thing so much more interesting and so much more rich and complex to read because you don't know what the point of it is until you get to the
Yeah.
end, and even then, they're kind of leaving you to draw your own conclusions.
Absolutely, and it's one of those. The book has got 4 or 5 stories in it because it took a really long time. I think we'll get on to that in a second, but other stories then sort of try to explain what Constanta's up to and like why he always turns up during war. And I think the point you made is that it's like wartime's really good. It's good eating for vampires. You can pretty much go about unabated. Nobody pays you much attention because there's other things going on,
McDonald's
and
is open, yeah.
yeah, exactly that. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet, and then what I love is the stories that then follow on from that are all essentially prequels. Like this does essentially form like it is kind of the last story in Constanta's story, kind of. I don't know of any set since 1980. I think they're all set before, because it just means we can just look back over all of Earth's history and all the great battles that have ever happened, and Constanta can just appear
Yeah.
without any reason. We don't need to. It's the best thing as well. It doesn't need to be any logic. He can just turn up and he can say, "Yeah, I'm here because there's war happening, and this is what I do."
It's
And I think
Predator, like you
there's
say.
yeah, and I think there is something about is that in another story actually. Constantus essentially just gives a little monologue and just says basically like, everybody loses during war unless you can learn how to profit from it. And it's like, that's a very cold and chilling line, but that's his character through and through. Like, he is a war profiteer, and that's kind of, you realize that's kind of what Jerry Finley Day was giving us straight away.
Mm.
He's bipartisan. He actually doesn't care who, if the Nazis win or if the Russians win on the Eastern Front. He doesn't care, because it's just more people for him to kill. It's just it's more cattle. He doesn't look at, he doesn't consider world politics or anything like that part of his concern. He's got bigger things or smaller things to think about, which is just his
Mm.
own survival.
And Schmidt's the only character he's really interested in any sort of level other than food, because Schmitt finds out that they're vampires. He's the only character who finds out they're vampires, really, who's got a chance of escaping. So he turns on Schmitt just because he wants to keep the identity. He wants to keep the good times rolling.
Yeah.
It's 1944. They're going to end soon, but he doesn't know that. So Constanta as well is, he is, like you say, he's just following party lines. It's all food to him. It doesn't matter which side it is. There's no personal stakes in it. There's no real interest in it. It's just, this is what I'm allowed to do. And, like I said, the authorities do not seem to care. He is killing the people they want him to kill. What does it matter to them how he does it? The bodies show up drained of blood and with bite marks on them. But, they're just more bodies in a field of bodies. They just get thrown into a hole and buried over and forgotten about. The authorities don't care. And again, the wider theme of it, you can see Jerry Finley Day talking about, the nature of war itself, you can argue.
100% this. The history is written by the victors. That would probably be seen as if vampires were real and were used by the military, they would probably be classed as a war crime. But as long as you win, it doesn't matter, because you can't commit war crimes if you win a war. It's only the people who lose who then have to go through the trial. And it's, again, there's layers within that where we're talking about, what we're willing to unleash on our enemies
Hmm.
in the quest to win a war. Is it okay to unleash these crazy supernatural evils? And I mean, that's like Weird War 2, that kind of occulty supernatural element there's lots of that, right? Like Indiana Jones did it, Wolfenstein, the game series, did it,
Yep.
Hellboy did it. There's a lot of this stuff. Hellsing, the anime. There's all sorts of things that show us, like, that have vampires and weird mechs and stuff, and add it into World War 2.
Black
Um,
Max, another rebellion comic I should
yeah,
mention. But again, the Baron is a vampire with giant bats flying around during the wartime.
yeah. Love that. And I think this is great because, it feels like one of those early stories that kicked a lot of this off. It's because it's 80, so it predates all those things. Doesn't predate Black Max, but it predates Indiana Jones, it predates The Keep and Wolfenstein and all these other things. So there's that part of me that thinks, oh, I wonder if
Mm,
Spielberg read this. I wonder if George Lucas read this and then went, do you know what, that would be kind of cool. I just, or if Mignola read it before doing Hellboy. I just wonder whose hands it passed through.
yeah,
Um, and I just think that's great because it is something about adding occult stuff into the World War II mythos. Something about it just it's like peanut butter and chocolate. Like, it's just, you don't think it's going to work, but it just does. It gels so well, and you can
yeah.
create all these wild stories with it.
Mignola's a really interesting name to throw out as well, because I feel there's a real Hellboy BRPD feel across the sequels to Fiends. We would have to go into those because there's a lot of them now. But as you say, we see him through time, going to different battles, different wars, different eras. Currently, Constanta is still around. He's currently in 2080 time. He's in America with Oscar Wilde,
I love that.
finding angels and zombies and all sorts of things happening. There's a train. It's great. Um, but yeah, it really feels like it's leaning into it much more now. The occult thing, the mystery of Constanta has been revealed. So now they can just start having fun with him in a different way, and it doesn't have the tricky moral stuff, moral side of it that the original did, because you can't put the same twist on someone twice. But they're still getting to use the character in ways that get to play around with the changing nature of you know political allegiances and who's on which side and who's currently on the most convenient side for Constanta to get a good meal. You know,
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot, Constanta's a character. I think you don't need to reveal too much about him. You just need to put him in different circumstances. You could run him for decades, but to come still, perhaps. Maybe they will.
I yeah, I hope they do. So yeah, the first story is 1980, and the next Stalingrad, which is the second story, is
Mm,
2005.
yeah,
I think so. It's
that
25
is
years it took for someone to make a sequel to that. And then
and
since then, they've been pretty thick and fast. Like they've been fairly steady. Like you said, he's back in the prog, and Fiends of the Western Front is my favorite story in the prog right now. It's so good.
yeah, Ian Edgington and Tynan Trevelyan.
Yeah,
The artwork is
Trevelyan's
incredible.
just he's amazing. So the Constanta run that he did, like in I think it's 2020, it's COVID. That was the standout for me. Like during COVID, during the lockdown,
Mm,
that was the thing I looked forward to most each week was getting more Constanta, getting really into Tyrion and Trevelyan. Love that stuff. But yeah, so we we've established that he's around and he can be in really in any point in history as long as there's some conflict that he can take advantage from. And I think that's just such a fun idea. Like I said, it's amazing that it took 25 years for somebody to say, wait a minute, we could do another story with this character.
mm,
And then since then, yeah, we've had Napoleonic Constanta. There's a World War One story drawn by Dave Kendall, which again, another absolutely chef kiss.
brilliant
There's a
artist, yeah.
Vietnam story. We can just keep finding new conflicts and just put him in it, and it's so good. The only thing I am interested in, like I said, I think canonically, Finley Day's story is the bookend. I think it's the last story in Constanta's. It doesn't have to be, but I think it is
Mm.
because I've not seen one set since 1980. But genuinely, I would love to see a Constanta story set in a more modern conflict. I'd love to see him in Afghanistan. I'd love to see him in Iraq. I'd love to see him in any of. I mean, there are wars happening in the world right now that writers and creators could use this character to comment on them, to comment on the state of conflict in our world right now, which would be perfectly acceptable within the pages of 2000 AD. That is what it has been doing for 50 years nearly.
Yeah.
So I just think he is a really great evergreen character that we can just keep bringing out and applying to different conflicts around the world, and using him to comment on those conflicts.
And who would have thought any of that from this first story? It is all there in those 10 parts. It is wrapped up, it is complete, it is satisfying, and yet there's so much more when you look at it a little bit deeper into it. There's so much more to find. Matty, I've really enjoyed talking to you about this story. You've got a lot more to say about it than I do in a lot more eloquent ways. So I appreciate you coming on to the show to discuss it. If people, as I have enjoyed this, where can they find you online? What are you up to, and what's next?
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. This has been a really really fun thing. Yeah. So if you did want to find me online, so I'm predominantly here on YouTube. You can find me on YouTube by looking for Stoked Matty or Matty Stoked, all one word. You'll be able to find me for searching for either of those. Or I found out recently, if you type in The Dark Judges into YouTube, I am likely to be the first result. I might be the second result, depending, but I might be the number one result on YouTube for that search, which I found out today, this afternoon, and made me very, very excited.
I'm glad it's
Um,
you and not the others that I've seen.
we'll keep working on that.
Mm,
And as for I'm also on Blue Sky. You can find me just by looking for Stoked dot blue dot b sky dot whatever it is social.
yeah.
That's the only social thing that I'm on other than YouTube. And as for what's coming up next, I've got 3 different comic book videos that I'm cooking all in parallel. One of which is going to remain slightly secret, but is essentially about a British Spider-Man ripoff. I covered this before when I spoke about Leopard from Lime Street. I've got another one coming through, which is also Spider-Man adjacent, and I've got 2 more Dread videos definitely coming out soon. One of them is going
Oh,
to be
brilliant.
about Block War, and one of them is going to be about the way in which Dread speaks about AI.
Oh, there's a lot to say about that, I'm sure. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing all of those. And yeah, you'll probably, if we get a chance, we'll get them across to you guys on socials as well. You'll be able to see them. We'll share them across because we have been at the Nerve Center enjoying your videos a lot over the
Oh, mate.
last few months, last few years. Yeah. Brilliant.
Thanks
Well,
so much.
thank you so much for coming on the show, Matty. And to everyone else, I'll just say, Splundig ver Frig.